The air on that first Saturday in May was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming azaleas, the very picture of the suburban peace Justin Roberts had sought. He stood on the edge of his lawn, admiring the neat row of gardenias he and his wife, Angela, had planted the day before. They were small, unassuming shrubs, a simple green and white border marking the beginning of their new life. Then he saw her. Diane Parker, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, was marching across the common area that separated his property from the next, a landscaper trailing her like a reluctant acolyte. She held a clipboard against her chest, as if it were a shield, her posture a rigid declaration of purpose. "Good morning, Mr. Roberts," she said. Her voice was bright, almost musical, but it didn't match the hard set of her eyes. She stopped precisely at the edge of his manicured lawn, her pristine white sneakers towing the imaginary line. "I'm afraid we have a small issue." The landscaper, a man with a sun-weathered face and weary eyes, avoided Justin's gaze, focusing instead on a point somewhere in the middle distance. Diane tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard. "These shrubs," she said, gesturing toward the innocent gardenias, "have been planted on a designated common area access path. They'll need to be removed." Justin felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach, the same one that appeared whenever a student tried to argue that the Louisiana Purchase was a scam. He had spent his life as a history teacher, a disciple of primary sources and verifiable facts. He had walked this property line a dozen times with the seller's survey in hand. "I'm sorry, Diane, but I think you're mistaken. Our property line extends another 5 feet out. This is our yard." Diane's smile didn't falter, but it seemed to thin, becoming a sharp, painted line. The HOA's community plat map indicates otherwise. This path has been designated for a future beautification project. I can give you 48 hours to remedy the situation voluntarily. After that, we'll have to proceed with the formal enforcement process. Her tone was still pleasant, the kind one might use to discuss the weather. But the words were an ultimatum, polished and cold. She made a neat checkmark on her sheet, turned with military precision, and marched away, her landscaper following in her wake like a shadow. Justin stood there for a long moment, the scent of azaleas suddenly cloying. He looked at the gardenias, their glossy leaves trembling in the gentle breeze. They weren't just shrubs. They were a declaration of permanence. The first roots he and Angela had put down in what was supposed to be their sanctuary. And now, a woman with a clipboard and an imaginary map was threatening to tear them out. He and Angela had chosen Meadowbrook Estates for its quiet, tree-lined streets and its promise of normalcy. Their last neighborhood, a cramped condo complex in the city, had been a lesson in shared walls and mismatched schedules. The move was meant to be an escape, a step into a life where their biggest conflict would be deciding what color to paint the guest room. Justin, a man who found comfort in the clear, unchangeable narrative of the past, wanted nothing more than a predictable future. He taught American history to teenagers who were more interested in their phones, patiently explaining that understanding where you came from was the only way to know where you were going. He believed in evidence, in documents, in the quiet authority of a notarized seal on a piece of paper. Angela worked for the county. It was, by her own account, a profoundly boring job in administration. She dealt with records, filings, and the endless, grinding machinery of local government, while Justin was passionate and sometimes prone to righteous indignation. Angela was his anchor calm, observant, and unfailingly methodical. She saw the world not as a grand narrative, but as a series of interconnected systems, each with its own set of rules. Follow the rules, understand the system, and you could navigate anything. It was she who had meticulously reviewed every document before they closed on the house, including the thick binder containing the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. That first night in their new home, surrounded by a fortress of cardboard boxes, they had sat on the floor of the empty living room, sharing a pizza and reading through the CC&Rs like it was a novel. "Here it is," Angela had said, her finger tracing a line in the document. Article 8, Section 4, Subsection 2, Maintenance of View Corridors and Common Paths. It gives the Architectural Control Committee authority over any landscaping that might impede designated community pathways. But our survey shows there are no designated pathways on our lot, Justin had replied. Angela had tapped the page thoughtfully. I know. But look at the language. Designated community pathways, as determined by the board. It's intentionally vague. This is the kind of clause people use when they want to invent a problem. She had circled the section with a pen, a small, prophetic act. Now, standing in his yard, the memory of that conversation felt like a cold premonition. He went inside, the screen door clicking shut behind him, and found Angela in the sun-drenched kitchen, sketching plans for a vegetable garden on a notepad. She wanted tomatoes, cucumbers, and a sprawling patch of zucchini, all in the very spot Diane had claimed for her beautification project. He explained the confrontation. Angela listened without interruption, her pencil still. When he finished, she looked down at her drawing of a tomato trellis, then out the window at the row of gardenias. She didn't look angry or worried, but focused, like a mathematician contemplating a complex equation. She gave you a verbal warning, Angela stated, more as a confirmation than a question. That's the first step. She's starting the clock. The clock for what? It's our property. It's our property, according to the county survey, Angela corrected gently. It's a common path according to her clipboard. Right now. It's a conflict of documents. We have the stronger one, but she has the authority to make our lives difficult until we prove it. The first polite but firm courtesy notice was not taped to their door or left in their mailbox. It was hand-delivered by Diane herself the following Monday, tucked into a crisp, cream-colored envelope bearing the HOA's embossed logo. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive bureaucracy, referencing their brief but productive conversation and formally requesting the remediation of the unapproved landscaping installed upon the common area access path adjacent to Lot 74. It gave them until Friday to comply. Justin wrote a polite, carefully worded email in response, attaching a scanned copy of their official property survey. He explained the discrepancy and respectfully stated that since the gardenias were on their private lot, they would not be removing them. He hit send, feeling a small surge of satisfaction. Facts, he thought. You can't argue with facts. He received no reply. For a week, there was silence. The gardenias thrived. Angela started preparing the soil for her vegetable patch. Justin began to hope that his clear, evidence-based rebuttal had resolved the matter. Perhaps Diane had consulted her own records, realized her error, and decided to let the issue drop. It was a naive hope, born of a belief that people, when presented with facts, would choose reason over ambition. Then, the certified letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday, delivered by a mail carrier who needed a signature. The green card felt heavy with significance. Inside was a formal violation notice. The tone was no longer neighborly. It was cold, legalistic, and impersonal. It cited, just as Angela had predicted, CC&R Fairgr 8.4.2. It stated that their failure to comply with the previous courtesy notice had resulted in a formal violation. It detailed the non-compliant items one row of gardenia jasminoids, approximately 12 in number and established a new compliance deadline. If the shrubs were not removed within 10 days, the matter would be referred to the Architectural Control Committee for a hearing, which could result in fines and other enforcement actions. Justin stared at the letter, the official tracking number at the top seeming to mock him. This was no longer a disagreement. It was a documented legal threat, the first shot in a war he had never wanted to fight. He looked out the window at his quiet, peaceful street, the very image of suburban tranquility, and understood that it was just a facade. Beneath it, a different set of rules was at play, and a woman with a clipboard was determined to make them the next casualty. The notice of hearing arrived exactly 11 days later, also by certified mail. It informed Justin that his case, violation 2023-17, unapproved landscaping on common area, was scheduled to be heard before the Meadowbrook Estates Architectural Control Committee. The hearing would take place the following Wednesday at 7:00 p.m. in the community clubhouse, a sterile, beige building that smelled faintly of chlorine from the adjacent pool. Angela reviewed the notice with the dispassionate focus of a scholar examining an ancient text. She chairs the committee, Angela noted, pointing to the list of members at the bottom of the page. Diane Parker, chair. The other two, Robert Gable and Maria Finch. They're her staunchest allies on the board. This isn't a hearing, Justin. It's a formality, a kangaroo court. So we don't go, he asked, a fresh wave of frustration washing over him. No, we go, Angela said firmly. We have to go. We have to participate in the process. Even if it's rigged, we have to get our objections on the record. Every letter we send, every statement we make, it all becomes part of the official file. We're building our own primary source collection. The clubhouse was exactly as Justin had pictured it. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly yellow pallor on the vinyl chairs and linoleum floor. Diane sat at the head of a folding table, flanked by Robert, a beefy man with a perpetual scowl, and Maria, a thin, nervous woman who nodded at everything Diane said. A handful of other homeowners were scattered in the audience, looking either bored or morbidly curious. Diane called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel that seemed absurdly out of place. She read through the agenda with crisp efficiency until she reached his case. Next, we have violation 2023-17, Mr. and Mrs. Roberts of 124 Chestnut Lane, she announced, looking directly at Justin. Mr. Roberts, you have 5 minutes to present your position. Justin stood, his heart beating a little faster than he would have liked. He had prepared his argument carefully, laying out his evidence in a logical sequence. He presented a large, clear copy of their official, county-filed property survey, pointing to the legally defined boundaries. He showed dated photographs of the area before they planted the gardenias, demonstrating there had never been a path, worn or otherwise. He read aloud from his deed, which made no mention of any HOA-controlled easement or access path on his lot. As you can see, he concluded, his voice steady, the evidence clearly shows that the shrubs are located entirely on our private property. Therefore, they do not fall under the ACC's jurisdiction as defined by the CC&Rs. Diane listened with an expression of polite interest, her hands folded neatly on the table. When he was finished, she smiled. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. We appreciate you sharing your perspective. The committee, however, must also consider the official community plat map used by the board for all common area designations. She did not produce this map. She simply stated its existence as an indisputable fact. Robert Gable cleared his throat. That part of your yard has always been considered a visual corridor to the Greenbelt. Justin, we can't have everyone planting whatever they want and blocking the community's aesthetic flow. It's about protecting property values for everyone. But it's not a visual corridor, Justin countered, trying to keep the exasperation from his voice. It's my backyard. And my survey is a legal document, filed with the county. Diane held up a hand. We understand. However, the board has been operating under the guidance of its own maps for 20 years. A precedent has been set. She turned to her committee members. Do I have a motion? I move to find the homeowner in non-compliance and to begin levying a fine of $100 per day until the violation is remedied, Maria Finch said immediately, as if reading from a script. I second the motion, Robert grunted. All in favor, Diane asked. 3 hands went up in unison. The motion carries. Mr. Roberts, you will receive a formal notice of fine in the mail. This hearing is adjourned. The entire process had taken less than 10 minutes. Justin stood there, his evidence in his hands, feeling utterly powerless. He had come armed with facts, but he had walked into a courtroom where the verdict had been decided before the trial even began. As he and Angela walked home through the quiet, darkening streets, he felt a cold anger settle deep in his chest. This was no longer about gardenias. It was about the abuse of power, the weaponization of bureaucracy to bully and intimidate. Now what, he asked, the word tasting like defeat. Angela squeezed his hand. Her touch was warm and steady. Now, she said, her voice devoid of any panic. The real research begins. The next morning, Justin began his counteroffensive, guided by Angela's quiet, strategic questions. He started with a formal, written request to the HOA's management company, Prime Community Management, for official records, citing the relevant state statutes that gave homeowners the right to inspect HOA documents. He asked for copies of the board and ACC meeting minutes for the past 3 years, all current vendor contracts, and, most importantly, a copy of the official community plat map Diane had referenced. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived. The meeting minutes were inside, but they were almost useless. Entire pages were redacted, with thick black lines obscuring any discussion related to finances or contracts. The sections on landscaping bids were completely blacked out. A polite cover letter from the management company explained that these redactions were necessary to protect vendor privacy and proprietary financial information. It was a transparent stonewall. The plat map was not included. Another note explained that the map was a proprietary board document, not intended for general distribution. They're hiding something, Justin said, spreading the redacted pages across their dining room table. Something about a landscaping contract. Of course they are, Angela said, examining the blacked-out sections. That's the motive. Your gardenias aren't the problem. They're the obstacle. They're in the way of her project. His investigation felt stalled. He had the effect the harassment, but the cause was hidden behind a wall of corporate doublespeak and black ink. He needed another source, a human source. He found one in Betty Miller. Betty was an elderly widow who lived 2 houses down. A sweet, gentle woman with a passion for baking and a magnificent garden of her own. Justin had seen her talking to Diane on several occasions and noticed that Betty always seemed anxious afterward. One afternoon, seeing her tending her roses, he wandered over. He started by complimenting her garden, and she lit up, proudly showing him her prize-winning hydrangeas. After a few minutes of pleasantries, he cautiously brought up the HOA. Betty's smile faded instantly. Her shoulders seemed to slump. Oh, that Diane. She sighed, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She glanced nervously toward Diane's house down the street. You have to be so careful. Justin explained his situation with the gardenias and the common path. Betty listened, her expression a mixture of sympathy and fear. When he finished, she looked at the empty space in the corner of her own front yard. "She did the same thing to me last year," Betty said, her voice trembling slightly. "Right there. I had a beautiful oak tree, a scarlet oak. My husband, Frank, planted it the day our son was born. It was over 50 feet tall." Her eyes misted over. "Diane said it was encroaching on a view corridor. She cited the same rule she's using on you. She sent letters, held a hearing, fined me $200 a day. I'm on a fixed income. Mr. Roberts, I couldn't afford the fines or the legal fight. I had it cut down." Justin felt a surge of protective anger. It was one thing to come after him, but to bully an elderly widow into destroying a tree her late husband had planted was a different level of cruelty. "Betty, did she ever show you a map? Proof of this view corridor?" Betty shook her head. "No, just her clipboard. She said it was on the HOA map. I didn't know what to do." Then she paused, a flicker of memory in her eyes. "You know, when I bought this house, years ago, the previous owner told me he'd had a full survey done before he put up the back fence. A really official one. From the county. He said he wanted to be sure about the property lines. I never saw it, but he mentioned it was filed downtown. It was the breadcrumb he needed, a survey filed with the county, a public record, an unchangeable fact." "Thank you, Betty," Justin said, his resolve hardening. "Thank you for telling me this." His victory, he realized, wouldn't just be for him and Angela anymore. It would be for Betty. It would be for Frank's oak tree. The following Monday, Justin took a personal day from school. He drove downtown to the county recorder's office, a cavernous, anachronistic building that smelled of old paper and floor wax. He felt a sense of comfort here. It was an archive, a temple of primary sources. He was initially overwhelmed by the sheer volume of records and the arcane filing system. He was about to give up when a man in a rumpled shirt approached him. He was older, with kind eyes behind thick glasses and the patient air of a lifelong public servant. His name tag read, "George, Records Specialist." "Lost?" George asked with a friendly smile. Justin explained his predicament. He was looking for original subdivision plans, property surveys, and any recorded easements for Meadowbrook Estates, circa 1998. George's eyes lit up. "Ah, a classic HOA dispute," he said knowingly. "Let me show you how to navigate the stacks. There's a world of difference between an HOA's internal, often unrecorded, community map and the official plat map filed with the county. One is a suggestion, the other is the law." For the next 2 hours, George became his guide. He helped Justin pull the massive, bound volumes containing the original subdivision filings. And there, on a heavy sheet of drafting linen, was the official plat map for Meadowbrook Estates. Section 2. It was a beautiful, hand-drawn document, covered in the seals and signatures of county surveyors and planning commissioners. George spread the map on a large viewing table. "Now, find your lot number." 74. "You said?" Justin leaned over, his finger tracing the lines, and he found it. Lot 74. The boundaries were marked with precise, unforgiving ink. There was no common area access path, no view corridor, no easement. The 5 feet of land where his gardenias now grew was unequivocally, legally, his property. A wave of triumphant relief washed over him. He had it, the incontrovertible proof. "This is it," Justin breathed. "This is the primary source." "Always is," George said with a satisfied nod. "The county record doesn't lie." But George wasn't finished. You mentioned they're planning a landscaping project, he asked. Sometimes, if an HOA is seeking a major contract, they have to file unredacted meeting minutes as part of the bidding process, or for certain permits. Let's check the miscellaneous civil filings. He led Justin to a different section, to rows of digitized records on microfiche. After 20 minutes of searching, George found a recent filing from the Meadowbrook HOA related to a water usage permit for a proposed irrigation system. Attached to the permit application, as a supporting document, was a full, unredacted copy of the Board of Directors meeting, minutes from 3 months prior. Justin scrolled through the document, his heart pounding. And there it was, in plain text, under the heading New Business Greenbelt Beautification Initiative. President Parker presented a preliminary bid from Parker Landscaping, LLC for the installation of a new stone pathway and irrigation system along the common area corridor behind lots 72 through 78. The bid, in the amount of $48,000, was reviewed. President Parker noted that her brother-in-law, Mark Parker, is the sole proprietor of Parker Landscaping, LLC, but assured the board that the bid was competitive. The board voted to provisionally approve the project, pending finalization of the pathway's route and removal of any homeowner landscaping currently encroaching on the proposed area. President Parker was tasked with resolving the encroachment issue at Lot 74 as a first step. Justin stared at the screen, the words blurring together. It was all there. The lie about the common path, the fabricated violation, the rigged hearing. It wasn't just about power or aesthetics. It was about money. A $48,000 contract for her brother-in-law. His gardenias were standing in the way of a clear and profound conflict of interest. He printed a certified copy of the plat map and the unredacted minutes, the official county seal stamped in raised ink on each page. As he walked out of the recorder's office and into the bright sunlight, he felt like a different person. He was no longer a victim reacting to harassment. He was an investigator who had uncovered the truth. He had the facts, the motive, and the proof, and he knew exactly where he was going to present them. Armed with certified copies of the plat map and the damning meeting minutes, Justin felt a surge of confidence. This was the historical equivalent of finding a signed confession in a locked diary. He drafted a calm, professional email to the HOA Board of Directors and the account manager at Prime Community Management. He attached the documents and laid out the facts in a clear, numbered list. 1. The alleged common area access path does not exist on the official, county-filed plat map. 2. The disputed land is, by legal definition, the private property of the homeowners of Lot 74. 3. The campaign to clear this land appears to be motivated by a pending $48,000 landscaping contract with a company owned by President Parker's brother-in-law. A clear conflict of interest that was not disclosed to the general membership. He concluded by respectfully requesting that the violation be rescinded, the fines dropped, and an apology issued. He clicked send, certain that this undeniable evidence would force them to back down. The response came 2 days later, and it was not what he expected. It wasn't an email from the board or a call from the management company. It was a thick, menacing envelope from the law firm of Thorne, Cunningham and Slate, the HOA's notoriously aggressive legal counsel. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. It began by dismissing his evidence as irrelevant and misleading. It accused him of making defamatory and slanderous claims against a respected member of the community. It informed him that his refusal to pay the accumulating fines, now totaling over $2,000, had prompted the board to vote in a special executive session. They had authorized their attorneys to begin the process of placing a lien on his property. A lien, Justin said, the word feeling alien and dangerous in his mouth. He was sitting at the kitchen table, the letter spread before him like a declaration of war. Angela read it over his shoulder, her expression grim. "They're not backing down," she said. "They're doubling down. A lien threatens your title to the house. They know that's the one threat a homeowner can't ignore. They're trying to force you to fold before this gets public." Justin felt the heat rise in his collar. So they're just going to ignore the county records, ignore their own meeting minutes. They're betting you don't have the money or the will to fight their law firm in court, Angela explained. They're betting you'll give up and remove the gardenias to make it all go away. It's a classic intimidation tactic. The letter ended with a final, chilling paragraph. "We trust you will cease and desist from spreading these baseless allegations, and will take immediate action to remedy the outstanding violation. Failure to do so will leave the association with no alternative but to pursue all available legal remedies to protect its interests, including foreclosure on the lien." Foreclosure. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, all for a row of small, white-flowered shrubs. But it wasn't about the shrubs anymore. It was about a fundamental principle. He looked at Angela, expecting to see fear in her eyes. Instead, he saw a quiet, unyielding resolve. "They've made a mistake," she said softly. "They've given us a public forum." Tucked into the legal paperwork was a required notification. The Meadowbrook Estates annual homeowners meeting was scheduled in 2 weeks. All homeowners were invited to attend and could sign up for a 5-minute speaking slot during the open forum session. "That's our stage," Angela said. "You can't win in their rigged hearings or against their lawyers, but you can win in the court of public opinion, in front of your neighbors. You just have to present the evidence so clearly that no one can ignore it." The 2 weeks leading up to the annual meeting were a blur of preparation. Justin felt like he was preparing for the most important lesson of his life. He created a simple, powerful PowerPoint presentation. He didn't fill it with angry text or accusations. He just used images, Diane's violation notices, the heavily redacted minutes he had received, the official plat map, and the unredacted minutes revealing the conflict of interest. He scanned and enlarged each document, highlighting the key sections in red. His entire case was visual, factual, and undeniable. The night of the meeting. The community clubhouse was packed. Most homeowners only showed up once a year, primarily to complain about dues or pool hours. The air was stuffy, thick with the scent of cheap coffee and suburban discontent. Diane sat at the head table, radiating an aura of absolute control. The rest of the board flanked her, looking bored. Justin had signed up for a speaking slot. His name was fourth on the list. He sat next to Angela, his hands clammy, his stomach a tight knot of anxiety and anticipation. He saw Betty Miller sitting near the back, giving him a small, encouraging nod. When his name was called, he walked to the podium at the front of the room. A large projection screen loomed behind him, and next to it, a digital clock was set to 5:00. "Good evening," Justin began, his voice steadier than he felt. "My name is Justin Roberts, from 124 Chestnut Lane. For the past 6 weeks, my family has been the target of a campaign of escalating harassment by our HOA president. I'm here tonight to present the facts." He clicked the remote. The first slide appeared a copy of the initial courtesy notice about his gardenias. J:55 on the clock. It began with this notice, claiming our new shrubs were on a common path. He clicked again. The formal violation notice, citing CC&R for ER 8.4.2 appeared. J:20. 20. It escalated to a formal violation, citing a vaguely worded rule about maintenance of view corridors and common paths. Diane shifted in her seat, her pleasant mask beginning to crack. I was told that this path was on the official HOA community map. When I requested a copy of that map, my request was denied. So I went to the county recorder's office to find the truth. He clicked the remote. The next image filled the screen, silencing the low murmur in the room. It was the official, sealed county plat map. He had highlighted his lot, the property lines shining in bright yellow. B10. This is the official, legally binding plat map for our neighborhood, on file with the county. As you can see, there is no common path. There is no view corridor. The land is, and always has been, my private property. A wave of whispers swept through the room. People were leaning forward, pointing at the screen. Justin could feel the atmosphere shifting. So why, he asked, his voice ringing with conviction. Why invent a violation and threaten my family with fines and a lien on our home? I found the answer to that in another public record. He clicked again. The screen now showed the unredacted meeting minutes, with the paragraph about Parker Landscaping, LLC, highlighted for all to see. Then This is from the board's own minutes. President Parker is pushing for a $48,000 contract for a company owned by her brother-in-law. My gardenias and my property were simply in the way of that project. The room erupted. The whispers turned into outraged murmurs. Conflict of interest, someone shouted from the back. Diane's face was ashen. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The other board members were looking at her, then at the screen. Their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning horror as they realized their own liability. Justin held up a hand for silence. He had one more minute. This wasn't just about me, he said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing the room in. He gestured toward the back. This is a pattern. Last year, Diane Parker used the same fabricated view corridor excuse to force Betty Miller, an 80-year-old widow on a fixed income, to cut down a 50-foot oak tree her late husband had planted. A collective gasp went through the crowd. All eyes turned to Betty, who looked small and tearful, but also resolute. Now, I have enough evidence here to pursue legal action for damages, Justin continued, looking directly at the panicked board members. But that's not what I want. A 30 on the clock. He advanced to his final slide. It was a simple proposal, written in plain black text. I am presenting a choice to this community and to this board. I will not seek any financial damages. In return, I ask for two things. First, that the board vote tonight to formally censure President Parker for her actions. And second, that the $48,000 allocated for her brother-in-law's unnecessary path be repurposed. I move that we use a portion of those funds to establish a new community restoration fund, and that its very first act be to hire a professional arborist to plant a new, mature scarlet oak tree in Betty Miller's yard. The clock hit 0. Justin stepped back from the podium. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then, the room exploded into applause. It wasn't just clapping, it was a standing ovation. A roar of approval from neighbors who had seen the clear evidence of corruption and the simple, elegant justice of the solution he offered. He hadn't just exposed a lie. He had offered a path to redemption for the whole community. The applause rolled over the head table like a tidal wave. Diane Parker sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and fury, utterly defeated, not by anger or revenge, but by documented facts and a simple act of restorative kindness. The other board members, seeing the unified outrage of the homeowners and a clear way to avoid a lawsuit, scrambled away from her as if she were contagious. Robert Gable, The man who had seconded the motion against Justin was the first to grab a microphone. I believe a motion is in order," he stammered, refusing to look at Diane. "I move that we immediately table the pending lien on Lot 74 and suspend all fines. And I further move that we schedule an emergency executive session to discuss the serious allegations raised here tonight, and to commission a full, independent audit of all recent vendor contracts." Before he could even finish, a dozen hands shot up to second the motion. The vote was nearly unanimous. The representative from Prime Community Management, a man who had been trying to shrink into his chair for the last 5 minutes, stood up and promised his company's full cooperation with the audit, his voice slick with the panic of a man trying to get ahead of a legal firestorm. Diane said nothing. She simply gathered her papers with trembling hands, stood, and walked out of the clubhouse, the eyes of every person in the room following her in silent condemnation. In the weeks that followed, the changes were swift and decisive. Diane Parker submitted her resignation via email the next day. The independent audit uncovered not only the blatant conflict of interest with her brother-in-law, but also several other instances of questionable financial management, leading the board to terminate its contract with Prime Community Management and seek new, more transparent representation. A new transparency committee was formed, with Justin and, surprisingly, Betty Miller as its first 2 members. The Community Restoration Fund was officially established, and its creation was the first item in the next neighborhood newsletter. 2 months after the annual meeting, on a bright Saturday morning, a small crowd of neighbors gathered on Betty Miller's lawn. A landscaping truck from a reputable, locally owned nursery carefully lowered a magnificent 20-foot scarlet oak into a freshly dug hole in the exact spot where the old one had stood. Betty cried, tears of gratitude streaming down her face as she placed the first shovel of dirt around its base. It wasn't the same tree. Of course, the 50 years of memories couldn't be replaced. But it was a start. It was a symbol that the community could heal, that it could right a wrong. Later that evening, Justin and Angela sat on their back patio, looking out at their thriving gardenias and the newly tilled patch of earth where the tomato and cucumber plants were already taking hold. The air was peaceful, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant laughter of children. "You were amazing," Justin said, taking her hand. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. You knew exactly what questions to ask, where to look. It's like you've done this before." Angela smiled, a quiet, knowing expression on her face. She took a sip of her iced tea. "My job," she said slowly, "isn't just boring administration. Justin, that's just what I tell people at parties." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I'm the head of the county's property records and fraud division. My team spends all day investigating and prosecuting exactly this kind of thing: fraudulent documents, illegal liens, conflicts of interest in real estate transactions. I didn't solve the problem for you, because I couldn't. It would have been a conflict of interest of my own." Justin stared at her, the past 2 months replaying in his mind in a completely new light. Her instant recognition of the vague CC&R language, her calm, methodical guidance, her insistence on building a file of primary sources, her knowing exactly which public records would hold the truth. It hadn't been intuition, it had been professional expertise. "All along," she continued, a playful glint in her eye, "I was just giving my husband the same advice I'd give any citizen who came to my office with a problem. I taught you how to follow the evidence trail. You were the one who had the courage to see it through." He looked from his brilliant, quietly competent wife to the peaceful sanctuary of their backyard. Finally secure, their partnership, he realized, was built on the same foundation that had won them this fight a shared belief in truth, evidence, and the quiet power of doing the right thing. He pulled her closer, the last light of the evening casting long, gentle shadows across the yard. The end.